All right, let's take a look at the Cleveland Browns and see what did they do during the 2018 off season. What did they do in free agency, and what did they do in the draft? Call me crazy, but I think the Browns had one of the best off seasons of any team in the NFL. Now, granted, they had a ton of money, as you can see here. They had $110 million of cap space, which is crazy. Some teams had like $1 million. Philadelphia, the Eagles, at the beginning of the offseason, I think they were negative, basically. At one point, they were negative. And to have $110 million in cap space is ridiculous. They just had carried over so much cap space. They didn't have any really great players on their team that had, were on their second contracts. It's just unbelievable. And I can't think of any other word. Even after signing a lot of different guys, handing out quite a bit of money, from my perspective, still $51.6 million in cap space. And they're going to carry a lot of that over into next season. I'm really optimistic. I'm bullish on the Browns. I know that sounds crazy. I've never said it before, probably. But I am bullish on the Browns, and I will tell you why. First, let's look at who were their free agents on their team. Well, Isaiah Crowell was probably the biggest one, okay? And he had some pretty good numbers, 952 yards in 2016, 4.8 yards a carry, plus he had 300 yards receiving. 1,250 yards from scrimmage, 7 touchdowns. Those are good, solid numbers. Last year, fell off a little bit, but still 853 yards, total, 4.1 yards a carry. He's a good running back. They let him walk. He had been playing on a second-round tender that was worth $2.7 million. I think they got good value out of that. He was every bit worth the $2.7 million. He went, and this is a guy that went undrafted in 2014 out of Alabama State, and look at the numbers that he put up. That was a great find for the Cleveland Browns. You don't hear that every day, but this was a great find for the Cleveland Browns. And he received a 3-year, $12 million deal from the Jets. So he was rewarded, getting a deal worth $4 million a year, and he deserves it. So congratulations to Isaiah Crowell, but he will not be with the Bengals next season. Josh Gordon was not an unrestricted free agent. He was an exclusive rights free agent because he's been suspended for so many years that the Bengals only were required, the Browns were only required to offer him a minimum contract this year. That's how exclusive rights free agent works. As long as the team is willing to pay him the minimum, then he has to sign it. And then next year he'd be a restricted free agent. And then what'll happen is, in restricted free agency, they can put a second or a first round tender on him. If they put a second round tender on him, they have to pay him like at least around $3 million, maybe 2.8, 2.9 million. And then if another team signs him to a big contract and they don't want to match it, then that other team has to give them a second round pick, which is a pretty big deal. Or they could even put a first round tender on him. They'd have to pay him a little bit more. But then, wow, if a team wanted to sign him, they'd have to give up a first round pick. So Josh Gordon, if he can get his crap together, will still be a Brown for the next year or two. I'll tell you, let me also clarify. First of all, I feel really bad for Josh Gordon. These players are allowed to drink alcohol and they don't get suspended. But if they dare to smoke marijuana, then the league will suspend them and not let them play. And I think, when you consider the fact that like half the states now have basically legalized marijuana, it's really almost tragic. He's almost like persecuted, in my opinion. Really. He's a guy who hasn't hurt anybody. He hasn't been arrested. You've got players that have beat their wives and got 2 games suspension or 4 games suspension. They suspended him for a whole year because he smoked marijuana. So I feel bad for Josh Gordon, but at the bottom line is, do you want to play in the NFL? Do you want to make millions of dollars? Because if you do, then you have to obey their rules, whether I agree with them or whether he agrees with them or not. So, and then he's not going to be at the beginning of training camp because he's got to deal with his anxiety issue. I feel bad for him. I really do. I don't know what his childhood was like, but I do. I feel bad for him. But hopefully he'll be back and they signed him to the minimum deal the Browns did that they need to. If he can be there, that is going to be a really scary offense. I tell you, it will be. Browns did not have many big free agents that they needed to worry about. So what kind of changes did they make in their roster? Well, for one, they got rid of DeShone Kizer. They traded him away to Green Bay. Okay, they also got rid of Kevin Hogan. And instead, they brought in Tyrod Taylor, and they drafted Baker Mayfield number 1 overall, and they also brought in Drew Stanton. So the quarterback room is totally different this season, which, isn't that the story of the Browns? Isn't that what it is like every year, basically? But this year is much different. They brought in Tyrod Taylor. He's a guy that, can at least not turn the ball over a lot. He can complete some passes. This is a big, big debate, okay? Why did Tyrod Taylor not put up better numbers with the Bills? Is Tyrod Taylor not a great quarterback? He's not a bad quarterback. Look at his numbers. 3,000 yards passing, 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, 60% completion percentage. These are not bad numbers. There's a lot of quarterbacks that go into the NFL and throw, 1 touchdown to 1 interception or worse. He's 3-to-1. He's not putting up 4,000 or 5,000 yards though. So, he's good, but he's not great. But why is he good but not great? Is it because he's not that great, or is it because he didn't have a great, wide receiver core to throw to and didn't have necessarily a great offensive line in Buffalo? I don't know, man. I'm a fan of Tyrod Taylor. I really am. I talked about this in the Buffalo video. You should probably check it out. But I don't know. I'm really hopeful for Tyrod Taylor. I hope he has a really great season, and he's going to have some good weapons to work with. Baker Mayfield, I like the pick, actually. I do like Oklahoma. I did not go to Oklahoma. I'm not a huge OU fan, but I respect the Sooners. And Baker Mayfield's a winner. Yeah, he's got the height issues. He's short. I'm not really worried about his character, honestly. I mean, he did have that one arrest where he tried to, kind of run away from the cop, I guess, because he was drunk or whatever, and I don't know. Not a big deal. Once again, he didn't hurt anybody. And then they say, oh, well, he's a bad sportsman because he grabbed his crotch one time or whatever. The guy, he's fired up. He needs to control himself maybe a little bit on the field. Try to be, more mindful of the fact that there's a bunch of cameras on him, so maybe he shouldn't be grabbing his what. But I think overall, Baker Mayfield is a fierce competitor, and he's a winner. So, that doesn't guarantee he's going to win in the NFL, but, I don't know. When you look at all those quarterbacks that were there, you look at Sam Darnold, you look at Rosen, you look at Allen, and I don't fault them. I don't fault the Browns for picking Mayfield. I really don't. He's got the right personality. So we'll see what happens there. At running back, Isaiah Crowell is out, but Carlos Hyde is in, and they drafted Nick Chubb from Georgia in the second round. They gave Carlos Hyde a 3-year deal worth $15 million, with $6 million in the first year. Let's compare these two running backs. Isaiah Crowell, best season, 952 yards and 4.8 yards a carry. Last season, 853 yards and 4.1 yards a carry. Carlos Hyde, best year, 988 yards and 4.6 yards a carry. Last season, 940 yards and 3.9 yards a carry, and 8 rushing touchdowns and 350 yards receiving. So, Carlos Hyde and Isaiah Crowell, very similar. The Browns decided that they would rather pay Hyde $15 million over 3 years and pay Crowell $12 million over 3 years. It's an interesting decision. It's an interesting decision, and it'll be interesting to watch how these two guys next few years goes and see who made the better decision. I mean, it's not only about the running back; it's also about their offensive line, and particularly their offensive line. So, but I think it will be really, really interesting to look at these two guys and see which one of them performs better. I think they'll perform similarly, to be honest with you. And the other thing is that the 49ers didn't really want Carlos Hyde. They wanted Jerick McKinnon from the Vikings. They paid him more money than Carlos Hyde got. So I don't know if it's a situation, obviously the Browns seem to have preferred Carlos Hyde over Isaiah Crowell, but the 49ers preferred Jerick McKinnon over Carlos Hyde. So there's a bit of a running back shuffle going around, and playing musical chairs with the running backs. And I think it'll work out for everybody. Let's see at wide. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I do. They're similar backs, really. Wide receiver, Kaysen Williams is out. He was a reserve wide receiver. Bryce Tregg's out. Sammy Coates out. These are not 3 guys who put up big numbers last year for the Browns, but no one in their receiving core put up big numbers. Jarvis Landry in. That is huge. Huge. He is a number 1 wide receiver. He does not play on the outside. He plays in the slot, but he's probably the best slot receiver in the NFL. You can see his numbers there. He had 758 yards his first season, had 1,100 yards his second season, another 1,100 yards his third season, and then 987 yards and 9 touchdowns his last season. So that's huge numbers, consistently getting, 1,000 yards a season, 9 touchdowns. What an addition for the Cleveland Browns. Now, they traded away a 3rd round pick, I believe, to get him. And then they signed him to a 5-year, $75 million extension. That's a big, here's the thing. That's a really huge number. That's number 1 wide receiver money. That's like Julio Jones. That's better than Julio Jones money. It's almost like Antonio Brown money. So that's a lot of money. But first of all, number 1, they're the Browns. They have to overpay if they want to keep the best players or get the best players. That's what happens when you win like 1 game in 2 seasons. You go 0-16. Yeah, you got to overpay. And number 2 is the fact that they have a crap ton of cap space. They had $100 million in cap space. Why not? If it guarantees that you get the guy that you want, then write the check. He's young. He's, consistent. He's a killer. That's what you have to do. It's a great move by the Browns, in my opinion. Antonio Callaway, 4th round pick. So he'll add some depth. Damian Ratley, 6th round pick. And then Jeff Janis. Now, Janis has never had 100 yards receiving, so he's not going to be, the big difference maker. The guys to watch are this. If Josh Gordon can keep his stuff together and be on one side, and then Coleman on the other side, if he can step up in his second year, and then Jarvis Landry is going to do what he does in the slot, you have 3 dangerous wide receivers to go with some really strong running backs, to go with a quarterback who's never had this good of a team around him before. The Browns' offense could look really good. It really could. Tight end, they brought in Darren Fells. I don't know. I didn't really get this personally. He only had 177 yards last season and 3 touchdowns. I guess they want him to be a blocking tight end. They've got a couple of other guys that they just drafted, in the first round recently. So, they're stacked, honestly. Now, it's all kind of potential. They don't have a lot of guys other than Landry that you can 100% bank on, although you probably could bank on Carlos Hyde. But if all these guys with huge potential, who are young guys, these are not like 30-year-old guys that are on, the end of their career, at the end of their careers. These are young guys who have a ton of potential, who've shown they have a ton of potential. Browns could be good. Okay? This is the big thing to look at. Joe Thomas decided to retire, which I think is really sad he didn't come back for one more year, especially with how much better the Browns roster is. They brought in Chris Hubbard, gave him 5 years and $37.5 million. So they expect him to be a starter, obviously. I don't know if he'll play left tackle or right tackle, but Chris Hubbard will be one of the tackles for the Browns. The other tackle spot is going to be a big question mark, and we'll talk about that in a later video. This video is only talking about what did they do in the offseason. We'll have another video in a few weeks that is going to break down the 53-man roster. And, that other tackle spot is something to keep your eye on. They brought in Greg Robinson, who was a backup last year. He started in place of Taylor Decker for the Lions last year, but he didn't play very well at all. And they also brought in Jeff Gray, who's been mostly a practice squad player his whole career. So really, tackle is going to be something to look at. I think Chris Hubbard will do well, but what about the other spot? Austin Corbett, they drafted in the 2nd round. Some people have said that he can compete for that other tackle spot. Joe Thomas, who is a future Hall of Fame tackle, flat out said Austin Corbett will not be a tackle. He can't, I respect the guy. He's got great game, but he cannot be a tackle because his feet are just too slow. I think he'll be a great guard. That's what he thinks. So, they brought in Corbett. He's kind of the future at guard. I don't think he'll start this year at guard, but they got Austin Corbett in the draft. At defensive end, they brought in Chris Smith. He was a number 3 defensive end, the first defensive end off the bench for the Bengals last year. He had good numbers. 26 tackles, 3 sacks, 3 tackles for a loss. Good numbers for a backup defensive end. They gave him 3 years and $14 million. I think for his age, that's a very fair deal. It's a good value deal. They drafted Chad Thomas in the 3rd round. That's a kind of a developmental prospect. He might provide a little depth. At defensive tackle, They lost Danny Shelton. They traded him to the Patriots. Last season, the Browns moved to a 4-3. Danny Shelton is more of a 3-4 kind of two-gap nose tackle player. And so last year his numbers dropped pretty significantly. He's a former first-round pick from 2015. But, the Browns have a few guys already at defensive tackle, so that's a loss. They didn't bring anybody in at the position, but they already have a few guys that should be able to pick up the slack. Some guys they want to see more. So looking at linebacker, LeVar Edwards is out. He was a reserve linebacker last season, but Jamie Collins will be back. He went down in the middle of the season with an MCL injury, but between 2014 and 2016, he's a guy who averaged 100 tackles per season. So that'll be a big addition for the Browns if he's healthy and can play the full season. They also brought in Michael Kendricks, who was cut by the Eagles, but he's still a really good player. So that's going to really improve the Browns' linebacking core. They got a really good linebacking core. They brought in Jermaine Grace, who was a reserve linebacker last season, and they also drafted Jannard Avery in the 5th round. Browns have a really good defense on paper. They got Myles Garrett at defensive end. They got a few other good players at defensive end. They got depth. They got some players at tackle. We're going to break down the 53-man roster in another video, but linebacker, they got better. And at corner, they got a lot better. Now, Jason McCourty, they traded, I believe, to the Patriots and let him pair up with his brother. Jamar Taylor, they traded to Arizona. I was a little surprised about that. These were decent players, but they brought in Denzel Ward in the 1st round. That's huge. This guy is going to be, right off the bat, a quality starting corner, maybe a number 1 corner. That's what they expect him to be. And he's the news has been that he's looking good. They brought in TJ Carey, who was a starter with Oakland. Had a great year in the final year of his rookie deal. 82 tackles, 9 passes defended. They gave him 4 years and $31 million. That's number 2 corner money. So they got their starting corner, their number 1 corner on a rookie contract. They drafted him early in the 1st round. They got TJ Carey to come in and be the number 2 corner. He had a great year last year. Finally. And then they also brought in E.J. Gaines from Buffalo. He's missed several games with injuries, but when he's on the field, he's a difference maker. 59 tackles, 9 passes defended. They gave him 1 year and $4 million. See if he can stay healthy. He'd be a great slot corner if he can stay healthy. They brought in Terrence Mitchell. Look at his numbers. Finished his rookie contract. Had a career season, 53 tackles, 4 interceptions, 17 passes defended with, I think, a Kansas City, and he got a 3-year deal worth $10 million. So he'll be competing for a spot with E.J. Gaines, most likely, for that slot corner position. So they have got 4 decent cornerbacks on their roster. They got good quality linebackers. Their defensive line looks decent. They also brought in Denzel Rice and Simeon Thomas. They drafted Simeon Thomas in the 6th round. Browns are looking good. At safety, Ibrahim Campbell is out. He was a backup safety. Kai Nakua is out. He was a backup last year. And they brought in Demarius Randall, who was with the Patriots last year. Sorry, not the Patriots, the Packers last year. He played corner, but the Browns are going to move him to free safety, where I think he has played before in his like earlier years, maybe in college. So, he had 38 tackles, but he had 4 interceptions last year and 9 passes defended. Those aren't terrible numbers. If he can perform well at safety, and they already have a couple of decent players at safety, the Browns, I'm telling you, I really believe that the Browns could compete for a playoff spot. If everything goes well, and listen, in this life, not just in the NFL, but in this life, things don't usually go perfectly. Specifically in the NFL, maybe some guy gets injured, a key player gets injured, maybe another guy doesn't develop like you hoped that he would, maybe Josh Gordon can't keep away from the ganja. That would be very bad. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but if things don't go wrong, I really believe the Browns could compete for a playoff spot. I really do. Who's their competition? Tell me, who's their competition? In the AFC East, you have who? So the Patriots are going to win the division. The Dolphins? The Bills? Look at the Bills' offense. The Jets? Get out of here. In the same division here as the Browns, now Pittsburgh will probably win the division, but I'm talking about competing for a wild card spot. Okay, the Ravens might compete for a playoff spot, but their offense isn't that great. Their receivers aren't that great. Look at the Bengals. Maybe, but I don't know. I don't think the Bengals have as much talent as the Browns do. You look at the AFC South. You got Houston, the Colts, who were terrible last year. I mean, Andrew Luck will be back, but that team was terrible from top to bottom. You got the Texans. Now, they had a lot of injuries last year. They might compete for a playoff spot. And then the Titans. I don't think that the Tennessee Titans will be that great this year. I don't think they have the amount of talent the Browns do. And then in the AFC West, who do you have? You have Kansas City. Now, they're a good team, but their defense is atrocious. The Chargers are a decent team, but they're not perfect. The Raiders, the Broncos. The Broncos have a great defense, but their offense wasn't very good. The Browns could compete for a wild card spot. I really believe that. We'll see. I mean, I know they won 0 games last year, but I believe that this team, if everything works out, and maybe it won't, I think you could see the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs. I really do. If you liked this video, click subscribe, because we are going to have some great videos coming up. We are going to, at the end of the preseason, break down all 32 teams' final rosters. And then each week, we're going to preview the upcoming week's games. And then in the middle of the week, we're going to review the previous week's games. So we are going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube. Click subscribe and make sure to pay attention to our videos. Thank you.